Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the previous episode, I went ahead and I did all of the initial foundational work on Dan's Nova header build. That consisted of knocking out the collector locations, the secondary sections, pretty much everything collector moving up towards the turbos on both sides. I got knocked out. And with that foundational work being completed, the next step in the order of operations is to actually begin on the primaries, meaning the tubes that run from each one of the ports on the cylinder head up to each one of the ports on the merge collector, and effectively turning this into a pair of functional headers. So at the end of last episode, we left off kind of waiting on the exhaust manifold head flanges to arrive. And I'm happy to say at this point in time, they are here. You guys saw a brief clip of them in the intro montage, but let's go ahead and take a moment, go over, and let's look at those head flanges and talk about one very critical element that you need to keep in mind anytime you're working with a GM LS engine. So over here on my beloved white table, we have the pair of head flanges for Dan's car. And they are really, really nice pieces. These are stainless steel head flanges. They are from Straight Line Industries, aka turbo-flanges.com. And I've worked with them for many, many years at this point in time, getting head flanges for a variety of different engines and applications and building a bunch of different manifolds and headers with their products. They do a great job, they're reasonably priced, and they provide exactly what you would expect in regards to head flanges. So these flanges, in addition to being stainless steel, they also feature these nice receiver grooves right next to where my index finger is. And what that does, if I walk over and grab one of the stainless elbows here, those receivers allow you to put the piece down into the flange like so, and they prevent you from having any misalignment that way, provided that the tube or pipe or whatever it is that you are working with is seated appropriately into the flange. Ultimately, it falls on our shoulders as the welder fabricators to make sure that everything's aligned and fit and everything properly. But having these counterbore receiver grooves in each one of the flanges for each one of the ports, well, it makes it that much easier. The one thing that I did want to talk about in regards to LS head flanges is making sure that you have the flanges facing the correct direction. Now, these two bolt holes and these two bolt holes are symmetrical on both of the flanges and on both sides of the cylinder heads. However, these two bolt holes in the center, where they are offset diagonally from each other, you really need to pay attention to those, as I ran into the issue in the past of building a set of headers, them coming out awesome, being all excited and everything for them. And when it came time to bolt the header and the head flange up to the side of the cylinder head, well, the head flange was inverted from the way that it needed to be. And I was lucky enough where I was able to drill 2 additional holes into that head flange to make it seat properly. But that really isn't the best solution. And it could have been easily avoided with a little bit of attention to detail and a little bit more experience at that point in time. Now that we're many years in the rearview mirror at this point in time, and that has been a sticking point in my head since that happened, we're not going to have that issue at this point in time with this setup. Now, being that these are billet flanges and those receiver grooves pretty easily indicate what is the outside of the flange versus what is the inside of the flange, you don't really have to worry about inverting the flanges and the bolt holes with these particular flanges. However, if you're using a simpler flange, something that's been either laser or water cut, something along those lines, well, it is very easy to flip the flange over, and like I said, these 4 bolt holes line up, especially if you're just kind of in the mock-up phase or in the fabrication phase of the project. If you're using just a couple of fasteners to hold this on, well, you could easily bolt the flange on backwards on the head. These 2 center holes will not line up, and then you'll be tasked with either figuring out a way to drill additional holes into the head flange or cutting the head flange off of the rest of the header, flipping it and welding it back on, which to me, having done that before in the past, that sounds like a total nightmare. So point being, and the moral of the story is just do your due diligence, make sure that all of your bolt holes do line up where they need to, and you'll save yourself a whole lot of headache and a whole lot of grief in the process. One thing I am going to do before I put the head flanges onto the sides of the heads is to surface finish them. And what I'm going to use is my Bauer surface finishing tool. So this is a pretty simple tool, and it's one that I like to use to put a nice surface finish and clean up any flanges that I'm using. It is just a simple drum sander, essentially, that you use the drum, it spins, they make a variety of different abrasive wheels for it. But the point being, with the wheel that is on it right now being this red Scotch-Brite wheel, I'm going to take that and run it over top of these flanges. And kind of the little bit of cloudiness and stuff like that that you can see on the flanges right now, it's going to scrub all of that off and leave me with a really nice, shiny, kind of brushed surface finish on it. This red Scotch-Brite drum is the least aggressive of the drums that I have here, and it won't take any of the tooling marks or anything like that out of the flange, the things that give the flanges character, but it will take that cloudiness and nastiness off of them and leave me with a really nice, brilliant surface finish to work with. Now, yes, it may sound crazy to put that much effort into just shining some stuff up, but if you look at the bigger picture of projects like this, where with all of these stainless bros elbows, how beautiful the surface finish is on all of these, how beautiful the surface finish is on the billet collectors, well, the head flanges need to match that as well. We are in the business as welder fabricators as being essentially functional artists and sculptors and things along those lines. And it just shows that little bit of additional pride in your work to clean things up and to make them pretty and all of that. So that's what we're going to do. It only takes a few moments and it makes a big difference. So if you have the ability to purchase one of these surface conditioning tools, or you have one already at your disposal, don't be lazy. Take the extra few moments that it takes to shine things up, and you'll end up with much better end products that way. With the head flanges in place now, and more or less my point A's and point B's for all of the primaries put in place, now I need to do some visualization. And I need to figure out where each one of the primaries is going to enter the collector, visualize the routing for each of them, and see what I can come up with as far as kind of a reasonable, tangible solution to run each one of these tubes. Now I have a few design criteria and a few things I have to keep in mind as I build these. Kind of the most prominent of those is spark plug access. So on these LS engines, the spark plugs sit underneath of the head flange. You can see the 4 kind of orangish, reddish boots right there. And there are 4 more on the other side, obviously. But as I'm building this and as I'm fabricating things and putting all this together, I really need to make sure that I leave enough room so Dan can get tools in here to be able to pull these spark plugs out and not have to fight everything the entire time. So that, like I said, is kind of the most prominent, #1 primary concern with this. And then on the passenger side over here, I need to allow or provide enough clearance for the dipstick tube also. So that, coupled with just fitting things from point A to point B in a limited amount of space. I don't know that I can necessarily say at this point in time that I have my work cut out for me, but definitely things I have to keep in mind as I'm doing this. So let me do some figuring, let me do some visualization and some assessing here and see if I can't come up with kind of a good game plan as far as how I'm going to run all of these.
Not turning back.
All right, I believe that I've figured out the orientation that I'm going to go with for all of these primaries. So it'll be the same both on the passenger and the driver's side, but I'll just give the example over here. So what I'm planning on doing is taking primary number 4, and I'm going to call these 1, 2, 3, and 4, just for the sake of argument over here. But primary 4 will go to the lower port on this collector. Primary 3 will go to the upper on this rear side. Then primary 2 will go to the lower on the front side of the collector. And finally, primary 1 will go to the top side, this top corner over here. And I think that that orientation and that routing will allow me the greatest ability to retain accessibility for all the spark plugs and all of the other components that I have to work around. Like I said, we're dealing with kind of tight confines between the collector and cylinder head and everything else. But if I keep everything kind of below the valve covers as best as I can, then that will give Dan the ability to remove the 4 bolts, pull valve covers off to adjust valves and things like that, do any valve train related service, while still being able to check his oil without issue. And at the minimum, he'll be able to change the spark plugs from the bottom side of the header. Not the most ideal, it would be nicer to be able to change them from the top side, which I'll still definitely keep that in mind as I'm building all of this. But again, tight confines means some concessions need to be made for this. So with that being said, and between this tube and everything else on the cart over here, I think we're ready to start cutting stuff, fitting stuff, and seeing how these are going to come together. Well, the passenger side header on Dan's car is now all fabricated. And there were some tight confines to deal with, but I think that the end result, at least at the end of the fabrication stage, came out pretty cool. So here is what we have so far. And you can see primary orientation, number 1 goes to this top front one, number 2 goes to the bottom front, number 3 to the top rear, number 4 to the bottom rear. And after looking at this before I started cutting and laying any tubes in place, that seemed like the most ideal routing to still be able to access the spark plugs and any other fasteners that he needs to, while maintaining good aesthetics and all of that. So I'm happy with the way that it has came out. I had to tweak the dipstick a little bit just to provide clearance for number 1 to kind of swoop around it. And this whole bend and everything here was done specifically to clear the dipstick. So we can't see a whole lot of kind of the busy side from up top. So let's go underneath of the car and I can show you guys a little bit more detail and some cool little design elements that I built into this. So down underneath here, we can see some of the details of this header. And starting with, you can see there is clearance to these rear spark plugs right here. If we move around a little bit up to here, then you can see that I left this pocket so that way Dan can get to the number 2 spark plug, which you guys can see the boot in there. And you'll have to excuse kind of the poor camera work. There isn't a whole lot of space here. But that pocket also leaves clearance so Dan can get to the 2 center fasteners on the head flange, as well as the fastener that holds the dipstick in place. And then the number 1 spark plug, super easy to get to, and I think this looks pretty cool and should work out pretty nicely for him. So now that the passenger side header is fabricated, it's time to move on to the driver's side. And although we don't have a dipstick to contend with, the height of this collector, it sits a little bit lower than the passenger side. So I don't know quite yet if that's going to be a benefit or an impediment, but there's only one way to find out. So let's go ahead and repeat the process, and let's get this driver's side header all fabbed up. And just like that, header fabrication on Dan's car is a wrap. I'm happy with the way that this driver's side header came out. I got it as close to symmetrical to the passenger side as I could, but they are not perfectly symmetrical from side to side, but rather just as close as I was able to get them. As you can see from these two clips, kind of the design between driver and passenger side, they're close but not perfect, just kind of due to the things that I had to build around in the engine bay. Now, the number one primary on both sides is kind of the biggest difference from side to side. And although the passenger side header is blown apart at this point in time, we can still talk about it over here on the driver's side. So the driver's side comes pretty straight in this area here, and then goes into the collector. Whereas on the passenger side, I had to loop the primary out and away from the valve cover and the actual engine. So that way there was clearance for the oil dipstick. But that kind of unavoidable disparity from side to side, I'm still plenty happy with the way that this came out, and I think that they are really, really sweet. So let's do what we did on the passenger side and lower elevation a little bit and take a look at this header from the wheel well side. So if I sneak you guys in here, we can see the same center pocket right there where the spark plug and the centered head flange fasteners are able to be accessed. The rest of the spark plugs are pretty easy to get to. Number 4 is really the only difficult one. If we kind of look up in there, and that number 4 primary is out of place. So let me put that back in its home. So again, down here, you can see the number 4 spark plug right there, and it's a little bit more difficult to get to, but not anything that's out of the realm of possibility. You can see I have plug socket, universal, and extension, and I'm still fairly easily able to get the socket onto the plug, and you just have to access it from the bottom side, which not the end of the world. There just is not the spacing available from port to port on these LS heads and the tight confines that I was working with to be able to get to the plugs from the top side, at least all of them. So that's just a necessary concession that needed to be made to build all of this and to fit everything as it needed to. So now that the header fabrication on Dan's car is completed, the next order of business and the next step in the order of operations is to blow this driver's side header apart as well, and then actually weld all of the tubes together. I'm really looking forward to that, as this Stainless Bros 321 stainless tubing, it is an absolute dream to weld if you guys have not had the opportunity to do so yet. I highly recommend playing around with it, highly recommend getting some experience with it, and highly recommend using Stainless Bros for all of your stainless needs. But with that being said, and us kind of at a stopping point for this episode, I think that this is a good place to leave off, and we'll leave the welding for the next episode. So with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. This Nova project is coming together better than I could have imagined. I'm really, really happy with the way that all of this is coming out. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all of these tubes, the driver's side there, and then the passenger side primaries right here, to seeing them colored in, filled in, all of that, and ready to go back into their respective assemblies and become the finished headers for this car. It's going to be sweet, and I really, really can't wait to see them start coloring up with some heat. But that is something that we'll have to wait until later on, as there's still plenty of work to do on this project and plenty that I need to get done before we even think about trying to fire this thing up. So that will be something coming up in the next few episodes, and you'll have to stick around and tune in at that point in time to see that happen. But with that being said, that'll be about the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and check out the website for manifolds, for merch, and for all things good that way. Keep your eyes peeled on the website and my social media pages, as I am in the process of designing the next apparel drop. I think it's going to be really cool. It's something that I'm excited for, with some new products coming and things that I personally have wanted for a long time. So I'm not going to get too much more in depth than that right now, but I will make an announcement when that stuff is available and when you guys can check it out for yourselves. But with all of that being said, that'll be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.